Weapons in Overwatch have often been the bane of existence for many players, especially when a new hero gets released. The numbers they have for the hero are often so out of whack, it gives Tierra a run for her money. So I'll review some of the most nerfed weapons in Overwatch, deciding if it was truly deserved or not, and ultimately answering the question, what is the most nerfed weapon in Overwatch? Now, I want to start off this video going over one of the most ridiculous weapon releases to ever grace this game, Mauga's chain guns. When his trailer first dropped, the miniguns looked enticing to use, already seen established minigun design in other shooters too. In TF2, the heavy's got a minigun, so why not give Mauga two?
I am heavy weapons guy.
The issue though is the damage his chain guns did on first release. Each minigun dealt 5 damage per bullet instead of 4, which meant that his guns did 90 DPS. However, Mauga's volatile chain gun does double damage to burning targets, so that number would actually be closer to 180. And because you can fire them both together, and because you also deal fire damage, this meant you could reliably deal 285 DPS when you're up close. By the way, this isn't even considering that your incendiary chain guns could also crit as well. To give some perspective, Transcendence does 300 healing per second, so you could negate an entire ultimate that in Overwatch 1 essentially made you invincible just by clicking 2 buttons on your mouse. But we're not done there. The stock ammo on your guns also got decreased by 50, and you would no longer have infinite ammo in your cage, just an automatic reload. Nowadays, your chain guns still deal 231 DPS instead of 285. But with that being said, your power is now just in your stomp and your overdrive. Personally, this nerf was necessary, but Mauga is just such a terribly designed hero that doing stat changes to him is like playing a game of whack-a-mole. You nerf his gun, and his stomp is practically a one-shot. And then all of a sudden, you're somehow living through a Bastion beaming you down with Matrix.
No way! No way!
This character has so many more fundamental design issues well beyond your chain guns that most people just think he should be dumpstered and left for dead. Now, if you're watching this, I've probably put Cassidy's Peacekeeper in the thumbnail, mostly because I'm a shameless plagiarizer, but there's legitimate reason to put such a simple gun here. I'm sure everyone knows from Overwatch Classic, but Cassidy's full damage fan the hammer shots burn tanks to the next dimension. Those shots now do 45 damage instead of 70. There was also a time in 2019 when his shots fired like a rapid fire DMR. This also had the unintended effect of reducing the recoil on his gun due to the fast firing. In 2020, there was also a period where his reload time got reduced by 20%. For obvious reasons, the team reverted both changes. But with that being said, they permanently nerfed Cassidy's mid-range damage during Illari's release. The fall-off had been rescaled from 25 to 45 meters to 25 to 35 meters. This meant at ranges beyond 25 meters, the damage significantly fell off, and just to put the cherry on the top, the fall-off was nerfed yet again just a year later, this time rescaling the Peacekeeper down 5 meters on each side. This meant you had clips like Illari out-damaging Cassidy from distance, which probably caused Illari to receive a nerf herself. Now, this might be a slightly hot take, but I actually don't mind these Peacekeeper nerfs. The devs just gave Cassidy that power elsewhere, specifically in his buffed HP pool, buffed roll, and buffed high noon. Cassidy has to compete with Soldier, Sojourn, Ashe, and Widow for that hitscan slot. You pick Cassidy because he's an anti-dive hitscan who's chunkier than all other hitscans at the cost of range, which, all in all, I think is a fair trade. Speaking of Sojourn though, she was extremely broken during Overwatch 2 beta, dealing 260 damage on a fully charged headshot. Do also keep in mind, HP pools were still smaller back then, so this was a literal one-shot. The first of many nerfs would come in December 2022, lowering the critical multiplier from 2x to 1.5. However, this didn't do much. One more SMG shot or a damage boost would nullify most of this nerf. She did get more tiny nerfs, like increasing the spread of her gun, reducing the SMG damage, or changing how the energy system worked. However, those would all be partially reverted or made up for in some kind of other patch. The real killer for Sojourn was midway through 2024, where her railgun finally got nerfed from 130 damage to 100. In short, Sojourn's peak railgun damage fell from 260 to 150. If that were the end, then I would say it's the most nerfed weapon in the game. But for some reason, the devs mostly reverted the nerf. They also tried to compensate with a bunch of SMG and disruptor shot buffs, so she became hard meta yet again. The most recent nerf was actually just a few days ago, but let's be real, it does fuck all. It's such a genuine travesty that the devs were on the right track to fixing Sojourn, but then they decided to backtrack for literally no reason. Lower level players can't hit railgun shots, so if you nerf the railgun, you're barely nerfing the average player. That's all I have to say, sadly. So far, I haven't mentioned any supports yet, and that's for good reason. Most supports that caused huge meta shifts, like Goats or Double Shield, had pieces of utility like insane AoE healing that made the meta what it is. In other words, it's rarely their gun that has much to do with it. That was until Juno's release, when 99% of content creators thought she was undertuned when she first got released. The first of many nerfs to her gun was actually during a trial where the shots fired for every burst got lowered from 34 to 28. The gun did get buffed damage-wise from 7 to 8 points, but that hardly ever got utilized because of how heal-heavy Juno became. After some time, Juno finally got hit by the nerf bat. In September, both the healing and damage got nerfed by half a point. The biggest change though came the month after. It reduced the healing to 6 points and drastically shifted the fall-off range, starting at 20 meters. As we all know, this barely had a change on the Stockholm Malga meta, and her orbital ray is still overtuned, but at least the gun is noticeably weaker than what it once was. I'm not directly opposed to reducing Juno's heal output. She does still have one of the highest single target healing numbers in the game, but her ultimate does need to be nerfed. Before getting to the big one in the video, I do want to briefly go over some honorable mentions. I did skim over Iliari, but the nerf to her gun ended up reducing her peak damage alongside slightly reducing the clip size. I've got an entire video dedicated to Iliari, so be sure to check that out for more. You could also feature Widowmaker in this video. She could one-shot body shot Zen in Overwatch 1, and she did technically get fall-off introduced to her gun. Despite this though, I'm keeping this as an honorable mention because it didn't technically kill the one-shot for Widowmaker, unlike the last hero in this video. And lastly, characters like Tracer and Genji did technically have their weapons nerfed before, but they're both still S-tier heroes regardless, so it wasn't that impactful. Now onto the gun you've all been waiting for. Without a shadow of a doubt, Roadhog Scrap Gun is the most nerfed gun in the history of both Overwatch 1 and Overwatch 2. To be honest, even back in Overwatch 1, Hog's gun had its fair share of ups and downs. It is pretty tough to discuss your gun without mentioning your hook, but of course, Hook 1.0 showed your scrap gun's strengths. Then afterwards, there was the spinning tech, which reduced what would otherwise be a big nerf to a scrap gun. The peak of Hog's scrap gun though was probably during the 2020 Hog Zarya meta, where for some reason, Hog had 7 damaged projectiles that guaranteed your one-shots. Nowadays, that pellet damage sits at 6.25, which honestly wouldn't be so bad if the hook wasn't trash as well. Because your hook got its damage reduced down to 5, as well as pulling enemies a meter further away from you, the character was useless throughout the majority of 2023. Technically, his rework did restore his one-shot back though. It slightly increased his gun's total damage, and if you pulled someone through Pigpen, you guaranteed the one-shots. However, the critical multiplier got reduced. Also, the Season 9 patch inflated everyone's HP like some commissioned pyrocynical fanarts. So, Hog was back to being useless. Thankfully, he still is. Now, while his gun isn't that bad on paper, you have to keep in mind that Hog's identity is tied to his one-shots. If he can't one-shot anymore, it makes the character meaningless. We can still see Sojourn and Widow, despite the nerfs, still retaining that feature in some kind of way, but with Hog, that's no longer the case. I do think the devs kinda made the right choice with nerfing Hog, but similar to Malga, Hog's design and reliance on a dumb one-shot mechanic was silly from the start. I've always said to rework Hog so we can bring more defensive utility to the team, similar to like a diva who just can't fly. This would mean that Hog's got a defined identity in the game without feeling terrible to play against. Anyways, that's it for the video. If you enjoyed, be sure to let me know down below, and until next time.